SypherPK just got back into competitive Fortnite by competing in FNCS, but his gameplay is... yeah, it's lacking in some areas. So I'm going to go through his tournament gameplay and find the common errors that he and many other new to competitive players make and provide some super simple solutions. Sypher and Noah start off the first round with a W key game where they're looking to get as many elim points as possible against the bad players in the low elo lobby. A 17 elim second place is actually a really good first game. However, Sypher was only able to get 4 of these elims and actually only accounted for 28% of the damage dealt by the duo. So there's some really simple ways where he can deal more damage and get more elims. They land at classy courts and in this game are contested by one other duo. After looting and ensuring they had a loadout capable of fighting, Sypher does a great job of building up to gain visibility over the POI as both players had no clue where the opponents are. And from here, he's able to actually spot a player hiding behind a tree and weaken him. With his health advantage, Noah is easily able to get the first knock in the fight. So now it's down to a 2v1. However, from here, Sypher keeps his distance and hard scopes the remaining player looking for guaranteed damage. Now this is actually a mistake I was making a ton at the start of the season, and this is something that the big Bloomy helped me with. So since Noah is already much closer, and let's be real, he's probably going to be the one finishing off this fight quickly and doing the most damage, Sypher's main job here is just to pressure the other opponent, not to actually deal damage. So rather than hard scoping, his immediate reaction should be to continually spray the other player with his SMG whilst closing the distance. This would make the solo panic and allow Noah to finish the fight much quicker. Now he does eventually actually sprint to close the gap, resulting in a great pinch. However, Sypher makes another mistake of just running in the open. If the other player didn't accidentally shoot his own wall, then Sypher could have taken a big chunk of damage and lost valuable shields here, and he had materials still to be able to protect himself. Now the chances of him losing this fight are very slim, but given classy courts only has 30 chests, wasting shields like this can create problems down the line in the rest of the match. So basically, he should have just ramped up on approach, which would have given him a nice right hand peek. But in the next fight, Sypher only deals 75 damage, whereas Noah is able to elim both players. Now Sypher plays from a really safe angle from above, looking to spray through cones and floors for some damage, whilst Noah goes for walls on the opposite side. However, for most people, it's just significantly easier mechanically to have both players aggress from walls at either sides of the opponents rather than one being above. Think about the fights you've lost in game to aggressive duos. Most of the time, they're just continually spraying from each side rather than one above and one at the side. And one of the issues of being on the side is if they rebox and you're above, you're still going for then a cone and a floor rather than just playing on different walls. While going for walls, it's much more likely that the other players will edit a wall and weaken it. However, they're much less likely to edit floors and cones. So by going for walls, you have a much higher chance of actually getting bleed through damage or just replacing. So if he had just played equally as safe angles but dropped down to these side walls, he would have blocked the exits for both the opponents due to the natural pinch and would have been able to finish the fight much faster. Here, he also just sprayed for too long. He notices that the other player is directly staring at him, and at this range, he's most likely going to get out damaged, which is exactly what happens. This then means that he has to spend some time healing and reloading, which is all wasted momentum. Actually, as soon as he got the original 50 damage tag off and noticed that the other player was staring at him, this was actually a perfect opportunity to drop to the wall that I mentioned earlier and to pinch and pressure from another angle. I'll say the one thing he does a really good job of here is continually blocking off the south side in this fight as he spotted a player there earlier. But in the next fight, Sypher makes a really common mechanical error that I see players of all skill level make all the time. I call this autopilot editing. After getting tagged, the opponents gain the height advantage over Sypher and start pressuring him. He makes the correct play to box up, ensuring he places a cone in his box. However, he edits the floor above him open to take a shot onto the opponent, and yes, he obviously misses a shot here, but the main mistake he just makes is completely exposing himself as he's just standing directly in the center of the box. This is the first of 2 instances of autopilot editing in this fight, where he just sees an opponent on the other side of a build that he owns, and rather than thinking about what a good edit is, he just sees an opportunity to deal damage, so then he does any old edit instead of a good edit. Had he moved forward into the front left of the box and did a jump shot, this would have created an angle that's very difficult to the other player to see and expose himself much less. Or he could have just edited the front right tile, which would have given him a slight right hand peek. But generally, taking shots from one tile below is difficult and always kind of awkward, and it's usually better to take basically any other angle. After taking this damage back though, Sypher makes a great play to drop down a layer to create some space, which gives him time to heal. This fight drags on a bit, and it isn't until Noah hits a body shot snipe onto one of the other players that they're able to gain back some momentum. Noah ends up knocking one, which makes the other player push over to him. Now Sypher makes a great play here at this time to keep an eye on his opponent and track what they're doing. So as soon as the opponent turns and focuses onto Noah, Sypher knows that he can mantle up behind him and follow him, which had he hit this shot, would have opened the fight nicely. The important thing to remember here is that he was watching the opponent and then reacted to what they did. Now again, he gets the floor and the cone over the opponent, but yet again, Autopilot edits. He knows the other player is underneath him somewhere, but he doesn't have any real awareness of exactly where they are. So he just edits down into the opponent's face, which results in him getting stuck in a box with the other player. So in his mind, he knew the opponent was somewhere below him, but he also didn't really know where Noah was exactly in reference to this player. So he easily could have just been one pumped when he dropped down, which could have led to them getting 1v2'd. In this scenario, all Sypher needed to do was slow down by 10 to 20% and ensure that he knew exactly where the other player was, which would allow him to make the right edit or the right play rather than just autopilot editing into their face. This 1 second or so spent ensuring you understand where you, your teammate, and the opponents are pays off every time, and that's exactly what happened when he did the mantle play early on. Another really good example of this is in the next fight where Sypher was able to get his first elim of the match. For new to competitive players, it's really common for them to try and be a bit too mechanical, to the point where they just end up wasting a lot of materials and making bad plays. Kind of similar to the autopilot editing, slowing things down by 10 to 20% and just thinking about what the opponents are doing often informs you of exactly what builds you should place and what angles you should take. Here you can see that he's basically just trying a little bit too hard to be a little bit too mechanical at the start of the fight. He cone and floors over where he thinks the opponent is, but again goes on to editing autopilot without any real knowledge and then just double edits down. He also selects the tiles on the left to double edit, which had the opponent actually been on this ramp would have given them the right hand peak, and Sypher would have had the worst left hand peak known to man. So taking his time and selecting the right 2 tiles instead would have been much less risky. However, the better play here is just to not edit and to drop over the side and look for a shot. The other player is actually under the ramp, so he easily could have had the shot, placed a wall to trap them, and then a cone for him to land on and edit through and finish the fight quickly. However, instead he just spams builds for a bit and then chops himself out. If you watch some pros, Thomas HD is probably hands down the best example of this. He almost never wastes a build. Every single one is intentional, and watching his tournament gameplay, his mechanics are not necessarily impressive, but every build is deliberate and accurate, and it's actually, to me at least, frustrating to watch because it makes me believe that I can play like that. So in my head, if I'm getting a little sloppy, I often tend to try and think about Thomas HD's gameplay, someone like Malabuka, who plays a lot more controlled and not that particularly fast, and then try to play more like that. Regardless, this is the playstyle that most competitive players should strive for. But back to Sypher. He then approaches the box from this odd kind of below angle, which given the opponent's positioning with all of these ramps around, isn't the worst, but the only real better way to approach this would have been to swing a little bit to the left side of the ramp that he's running on, as he would have had a slightly better right hand peak. Usually approaching from this below angle is a pretty bad choice if you have minimal plays from here, and editing out is particularly awkward. But regardless, the main thing they do well here is both create a great pinch, pressuring the duo from either side, so despite going up from this odd below angle, he's able to get his first elim. But one of the biggest issues that intermediate players make is that they miss out on free elims from really basic mistakes. Here, Sypher and Noah are claiming Loot Island to try and get some additional shields when another team starts to fight them. Sypher spots that the opponent is on the other side of his wall and swings a large edit open to go for a shot. Now firstly, he does a bottom left 3, which if you've watched my editing tier list video, you'll know that is some trash. But secondly, he edits from an empty box, which means that after cracking the opponent's shield, he's ramped over, making it almost impossible for him to hit more shots, which allows the opponent to escape. A simple cone in this box and a better edit could have ended this fight instantly, but instead the fight drags on and he wastes time and materials. The rest of the mistakes in this W key match are pretty much the same core issues: lack of pressure, autopilot editing, and some basic poor edit selection. But of course, this is just a W key aggressive match where the players aren't so good. So the mistakes that Sypher makes against some of the best players in the world are significantly different. They started this game on 199 points, and in order to qualify to the weekly finals, all they need to do is get 210 points. That's only an 11-point game that they need, which is a top 20 with 0 elims. However, the problem they run into here is that this is the final game of the tournament, and almost every single team in the lobby is in the same situation as them, making this an incredibly stacked game where they'll really need to focus on dealing a lot of damage for Storm Surge. Off the rip, they're uncontested at classy courts, and Sypher makes a great play to look for tags on players gliding. He hits 0, but their idea is there. Things are looking good. He gets a gold pump off spawn, which he should drop to Noah given he's the better fighter, but doesn't. And he makes a great play to prioritize the fast harvesting metal, EMPs the vending machine for gold, and both players manage to find Flowberry Fizz, so this game is set up almost perfectly. However, a team sneaks from a split drop nearby into classy courts, and they both jump onto Noah. Here, Sypher makes a classic mistake of material selection and yet again not slowing down. It seems like he was too focused on getting towards Noah, who had been hit weak, and in doing so left crucial angles open, which allowed the other teammates to damage him. In contrast, see how when Noah gets cracked initially in this fight, he covers all of his angles in hard mats and then tunnels back into the building to escape, creating a ton of space in hard mats. However, Sypher, despite harvesting those hard materials earlier, player left too many tiles open and also switched between all of his materials, meaning the ones that he did place were nearly all wood, despite having capped metal. This resulted in him getting pinched and was forced to run into a box that he doesn't own and dies. This is absolutely not the ideal scenario to try and get into a top 20 placement, especially when they have a max distance zone coming ahead of them. The team that sneaked on them camped their card for almost the full 5 minutes, which meant that Noah wasn't able to find any additional shields, but they were able to get the reboot off eventually in the storm. Now both players are back up into the game, but they've dealt minimal storm surge damage, and this is an insanely stacked lobby. They managed to make it out of the storm and into the 4th zone, however they have almost zero shield in their inventory due to that off-spawn situation. In this scenario, they pretty much have to get an elim to refresh their loot, and the only way to really get a refresh is by fighting someone, and the only way to really fight someone well is to fight someone healthy. Of course, you can also go for a double spray, but with DMRs, they just don't have the best loadout for that. So because they don't have many spare shields, Sypher should be playing extra safe and using the materials that they do have to cover every single angle, as losing health here will be devastating and result in them losing a fight that they end up trying to take. Unfortunately, he gets tagged from the west, and at the same time, a team from the south sprays them, leaving the duo with almost no health to fight from later on. Because of this, he now has to bandage up to 75 HP, which is also time wasted that he could have otherwise be spent looking for storm surge damage or fighting a team. Despite his incredibly low health, he makes some nice rotations into the next zone and do a great job of scouting for tags to keep them just above the threshold. Here, however, is where they make their next big mistake going into the 6th zone. They pull a lucky circle and decide to rotate deep into the dead side to harvest some materials, which keeps them away from everyone. Now in theory, this is a really good play, however this is one of the most stacked games in the tournament, and putting yourself in a position where you know there's going to be minimal teams results in less opportunities to deal damage to other players who are rotating. Now this eventually leads them to drop to 172 damage below the storm surge threshold in the 7th zone. A better play here probably would have been to have one player reharvesting materials whilst the other one still scouted to go for more tags, which probably could have kept them above the threshold. They did however manage to harvest critical materials here, but they're weak and need to fight a team in order to get their health and materials back. But now they have the time pressure of storm surge to worry about as well. They crack a player's shields and are a little hesitant, but eventually start ramping up, knowing that they need to fight this team in order to get their surge. However, after fighting for a couple of seconds, they kind of back out and end up trying to look for storm surge tags on teams rotating instead of just fully committing to this fight. Seems like they're almost just trying to play a little too safe, as they only need a few more points, which eventually results in them not getting any damage and dying to storm surge. Here they died with 203 points, and they only needed 210 in order to qualify to round 4, so had they just committed to the fight and beaten the 2 weak players next to them, that alone would have put them on 209. So all they would have needed to do was just survive longer than one more team, and then they would have made it to the finals. Now in these last games of tournaments, it's far too common for people to play too safe and not take any risks at all, which eventually leads them to putting themselves into some unwinnable situations. It was unfortunate that they weren't able to play the first 30 minutes of this round of the tournament since hackers had outplaced them, but had this not happened, they probably could have qualified. And of course, I'm highlighting the small but important changes Sypher can make in order to improve, but overall they should be really happy with this performance. Almost qualifying to round 4 is a really big achievement for their first FNCS back in years, and hey, it's much better than I did.